Marcus Hayes pushed his mop cart off the service elevator at 11:47 p.m. on a night when the snow outside had begun to erase the difference between the building and the sky. He had been mopping the 52nd floor for 4 months. Nobody on this floor knew his name except Marcus, the night security guard, who said, "You look sharp tonight." Hayes, regardless of how Marcus actually looked. The building was how it always was at this hour. Most pods dark. Some engineers still burning midnight oil, the fluorescent glow of their screens spilling into the corridor. The break room was a disaster of coffee cups and abandoned ambitions. The bathrooms needed cleaning. The corridor needed mopping. In 40 minutes, a system worth $400 million would begin to fail. In 12 hours, the entire engineering team would give up trying to fix it. But in this moment, Marcus was just thinking about Sophie's shoes, which had worn through at the heel. He'd need to find money for new ones by the weekend. That was when he heard it. The wrong hum. Marcus came home at 6:15 a.m. that morning, the kind of early that erases the difference between coming back and staying out. Sophie was asleep on the couch, her backpack beside her, her shoes on the floor. The ones with worn heels that she pretended not to care about, but that he noticed, because he noticed everything. He put a blanket over her without waking her. He made coffee he would drink cold later. He sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and started looking at cleaning jobs that offered better hours. There weren't many. The jobs that paid enough to keep an apartment in the city and keep Sophie in the school she liked all required working when she was awake. The jobs that let him be home when she got back from school paid enough for rent, but not much else. He'd been an engineer once, not a junior engineer. A systems architect at a company that had decided it didn't need people like him anymore. That had been 5 years ago. Since then, he'd had a series of jobs that didn't require credentials and didn't ask questions. The cleaning job was honest work. It paid bills. It let him be present for his daughter most mornings. These were the only metrics that mattered anymore. Everything else, the things he used to think, defined him, had been reorganized into a category he tried not to visit, the category of before. At 7:30 a.m., Sophie woke up. She came to the kitchen and climbed into the chair next to him without saying anything. Her hair was messy from sleep. She was wearing the shirt she'd slept in, which had a small hole near the collar that neither of them had bothered to fix. She looked at the notebook he'd been writing in, saw the list of jobs, and didn't ask about it. She was 7. She already understood that grown-ups looked for things they couldn't find. Marcus closed the notebook. "Good morning," he said. "Did you just get home?" she asked, the way she asked most mornings, like she was checking to see if the nighttime had worked out the way she planned it. "About 20 minutes ago." She climbed into his lap the way she still sometimes did, though she was getting too big for it. Her weight settled against him. He put his arms around her. For a moment, they didn't talk. They just sat. This was the part of his day he'd learned to protect more than anything else. Not the money, not the job. This quiet time before school. This small window where Sophie was just his, and he was just hers. "Your shoes are getting holes," he said. She looked down at them. "I know. We'll get new ones soon. I like these ones. You can like new ones too?" "Not as much," she said, and there was a logic in it that he couldn't argue with, because it was the logic of loving things that already knew you. They sat in silence for a moment. He could feel her thinking. "Do you like your job?" she asked. The question was so plainly asked, so free of accusation, that he felt something shift in his chest. Children asked the questions adults had learned not to ask. The questions that went straight to the thing that mattered. "It's a good job," he said. "But you used to have a different job." He hadn't known she remembered. I did. Why did you stop? He thought about how to answer this in a way that was honest, but wouldn't scare her. Honesty was the only currency he had left that was worth something. The company changed what they needed. I couldn't do that work there anymore. So you got a different job. So I got a different job. This one lets you be home when I wake up. Yes. She seemed satisfied by this logic. She got herself some cereal and milk while he drank his coffee cold, watching her move through the kitchen with the efficient motion of a child who had learned to be mostly independent. He hated how self-sufficient she'd become. He hated that she'd learned to not need him because he'd taught her not to need him because needing him had become too uncertain. These were the things he never said. I like you being home, she said, milk on her lip. I like being home. She nodded. This was correct. The world was in order. By the time he put her on the school bus, he felt like he could manage another night of mopping. A few more nights. However many it took until something changed. He didn't know what would change. He just knew that something would, because things always did, eventually. And sometimes when they changed, you ended up exactly where you needed to be. But more often you ended up somewhere you hadn't planned, and you had to figure out how to be okay with that. He was getting good at figuring out how to be okay with things. That night on the 52nd floor, he would hear the wrong hum. He would stand at a terminal and make a choice about who he was. But first, he needed to get through another day of ordinary time with his daughter, the kind of day that didn't feel important, because nothing dramatic happened. But that was the actual substance of his life. When he came back to the 52nd floor at 11:47 p.m., the building felt the same. The same marble in the lobby, the same security desk, the same elevator ride up past the offices of people who slept at night and worked during the day, who lived lives that looked like the way life was supposed to look. He'd lived like that once. It seemed like it had happened to someone else. He pushed his cart down the long corridor, south to north, the way his supervisor had trained him the first week. Bathrooms first, then the break room, which on the engineering floors was never fully cleaned because engineers left mugs and printed pages and half-eaten food in a way that seemed to communicate they considered the break room an extension of their desks. Then the long central corridor, where the engineering pods were arranged in clusters of 4 desks each, most of them dark at this hour. He'd been doing this for 4 months. He'd learned the rhythm of the floor. Which pods stayed lit until 10 p.m. Which engineers left coffee cups that needed washing. Which sections of floor were trafficked enough to need mopping twice. Which were decorative at this point. He knew the night security guard's rounds by the sound of his shoes on the marble and the time between passes. He knew a lot working quietly through other people's spaces. He just didn't say any of it. The corridor outside Lab 7C was different tonight. The door was shut, but the light inside burned white hot, the kind of fluorescent brightness that meant people had been there for hours, pushing through on caffeine and the specific stubbornness of people who believed that being present was the same as making progress. Marcus could hear it before he saw it. Not voices. It was too late for voices. But the low hum of servers pushing hard, harder than cooling fans usually ran at this hour. And underneath that, something off in the pattern. A sound that wasn't wrong in any describable way, but was wrong in the way that a note held too long becomes wrong. Sustain without resolution. He'd heard that sound before, in a different building, in a different life, when he was the person who fixed things, before he became the person who cleaned up after people who fixed things. He kept mopping. The break room was 40 feet past Lab 7C. He filled his bucket, changed the mop, head started back the way he'd come. And as he passed the lab again, he let himself look at the wall. The board on the wall outside Lab 7C was a monitoring display. A 65-inch panel mounted at eye level, showing a status tree for something called the Helios system. It was the kind of display put in corridors for management walkthroughs, a visual summary, nothing technically detailed. The sort of thing designed to let someone ask, "Is it working?" and get a color-coded answer, without having to understand what the colors meant. Marcus understood what the colors meant. He'd read about Helios 3 months ago during a 2 a.m. break when the building was quiet, and the CTO's office door had been left open, and there was a whiteboard visible from the corridor, with the architecture sketched on it, half erased, still legible. He'd stood in the doorway long enough to read it. Then he'd gone back to mopping and spent the rest of the shift turning the architecture over in his head, the way he used to turn things over, when he had the right to think about them professionally. Old habits, the kind of habits that didn't go away just because your life did. The status tree was red, not the soft orange red of a warning. The full arterial red of a critical failure. 3 separate subsystems showing fault codes across the right side of the display. A 4th caught in a restart sequence that kept dying at 67% completion. The progress bar would fill 2/3 of the way stall and reset. Fill, stall, reset. Like a man trying to climb a wall who couldn't get his elbow over the top, sliding back to the ground each time, with the same trajectory, the same failure, the same falling back. Marcus stopped mopping. He looked at the board for 9 seconds. He counted them the way he counted things, when precision mattered not in words, just in breath. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. On the 4th breath, he shifted his attention to the secondary terminal mounted beside the board. It was a small panel 12 inches wide, the kind of read-only diagnostic display that facilities management teams used to check whether HVAC operations were interfering with server cooling loads. Most people who walked by it every day had never considered it anything more than that. The icon grid in the lower left corner showed process timestamps, active processes in order of most recent execution, with their microsecond stamps in a small gray font. Most of the rows were unremarkable, but between 2 of them, specifically between the monitoring output log and the event acknowledgement process, there was a gap. 17 milliseconds. It would be invisible to most people looking at it. Invisible even to most engineers, in the way that small things become invisible when you've been staring at the large things for 72 hours. But Marcus saw it the way you see a crack in a wall once you've seen it. Immediately, permanently, unable to unsee it. In a distributed model, the monitoring feed and the event acknowledgement process needed to be synchronized to within a few milliseconds. When they fell out of sync, when the monitoring log got ahead of the acknowledgement process, even briefly, the system's central logic entered a state of confusion. It had 2 slightly different pictures of its own condition. Rather than accepting the discrepancy, it restarted the reporting process to try to reconcile them, which introduced the same gap, which triggered the restart again. The system wasn't failing. It was arguing with itself about what it saw. Marcus stood at the terminal. For 6 years he had worked in a space where his thinking didn't matter. It was safe. Nobody expected things from invisible people. Nobody blamed them when things failed. Nobody asked where they'd come from or how they'd fallen. The red board would stay red. The engineering team would keep failing. The company would lose the contract. People would get fired. The system would not be fixed. None of that was his responsibility. But somewhere in the last 4 months of mopping floors and sitting with his daughter and learning how to be a man whose life looked nothing like the man he'd planned to be something had shifted. Not in the obvious way that things shift in stories, not in a moment, but in the daily accumulation of small decisions, to show up, to be present, to notice his daughter the way she noticed him, to understand that being visible or invisible wasn't about whether people saw you. It was about whether you could stand in your own skin and not apologize for taking up space. He did not have administrator access to Helios. He had facilities access, which meant he could check cooling parameters and submit service requests. He could not touch the code base. He could not deploy anything. But the read-only terminal had a display filter function designed for sorting which process data was shown on the corridor board. And the read-only terminal, though restricted from code deployment, had been designed with the assumption that facilities staff needed to see almost everything in order to manage physical systems, which meant that what Marcus was looking at now and what he was about to do existed in a gray space between allowed and not allowed, between his job and something else. He typed 2 characters, W and L. His finger hovered over the Enter key. This would toggle the display filter that controlled which process data appeared on the corridor board. By removing the monitoring output log, he would hide the gap that was causing the confusion. The system would no longer see the discrepancy. It would stop trying to reconcile and start accepting. The restart loop would die. The red board would turn green, and he would be the person who fixed something that mattered. But here was the thing nobody told you about being invisible. It was safer. It was lonely, but it was safe. When you were invisible, nobody expected anything from you. Nobody could blame you for failing, and nobody could fire you for succeeding too much, for knowing too much, for being the person who saw what other people couldn't see. The Helios system had restarted 47 times since 9:13 p.m. In the engineering lab behind the wall, there were probably people still awake, people with their reputations on the line, people whose careers depended on fixing this, people who hadn't slept, people who were out of ideas. Marcus thought about Sophie sleeping on the couch this morning with her shoes on the floor. He thought about her asking if he liked his job. He thought about the careful way she'd learned to be independent because he'd needed her to be. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be the next time she asked why he stopped doing what he used to do. He pressed enter. For 9 seconds, nothing changed. Then the monitoring feed updated. The event acknowledgement process synced. The system looked at its own state and stopped arguing with itself about what it saw. The restart loop died. The red board cycled through orange and yellow and settled on green. At 11:59 p.m., the Helios system came back to life and stayed there. In the engineering lab, someone would notice first, would refresh the dashboard, would stare at it, would call over to their colleague, would realize slowly at first, and then all at once, that something had changed. That the problem that had seemed impossible had solved itself, or had been solved by someone, somewhere. In a way, nobody had planned. But Marcus didn't wait to see that. He finished mopping the corridor. He emptied his bucket. He pushed his cart back to the service elevator. He rode down to the street level. The snow was still falling, not as thick as before, the kind that melted when it hit the warm pavement. He pushed his cart across the lobby, and nobody stopped him. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody knew that something in the building had changed. Nobody knew it had been him. He drove home through the empty Chicago streets. The highways were clear. The early morning had that quality of time that existed outside of normal time, the space between when most people went to sleep and when they woke up. He felt strange. Light in a way he didn't recognize, like something he'd been carrying had been set down somewhere safe. When he got home, Sophie was still asleep. He covered her with a blanket. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee cold in his hand and watched the city wake up through the window. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if anyone would notice what he'd done. He didn't know if it would matter. What he knew was that he'd been the kind of man who could have fixed it, and he'd done it. Not because anyone was watching, not because he expected anything in return, but because there was something in him that couldn't walk past a broken thing without trying to fix it. That was true whether he was engineering or mopping or sitting in a kitchen watching his daughter sleep. 2 days later, Clark Reeves, the VP of engineering, found him mopping the break room during the evening shift. Clark was in his 50s with the look of a man who had spent his career in rooms where decisions mattered. He was not the kind of person who normally talked to custodial staff. But he'd watched the security footage. He'd replayed it 3 times. He'd seen a man in gray coveralls stand at a terminal for exactly 34 seconds and type 2 characters and change the trajectory of everything. "You fixed the synchronization issue," Clark said. Not a question. Marcus didn't stop mopping. There was a gap in the process timestamps. 17 milliseconds. It was causing the system to argue with itself. That gap was invisible to a team of PhDs for 30 hours. They were tired. They were looking at the wrong things. "You're a janitor." The word sat between them, without judgment. Just a statement. Marcus looked at Clark for the first time. "I used to do engineering. Systems architecture. What happened?" Marcus wrung out the mop. The water ran gray. The company decided there was only room for certain kinds of people in certain kinds of jobs. I wasn't one of those people anymore. Clark nodded, like this confirmed something he already suspected. "How long have you been here?" 4 months. "Do you miss it?" Marcus considered the bucket. "Every day. And also no, I have a daughter. I need to be there for her. That job didn't allow for that. This one does." Clark leaned against the counter. "The system still has 18 problems in its architecture." 19. Marcus said. "I counted them. Can you fix them?" "Maybe. Probably. It would take time." "How much time?" 3 months. Maybe 4. And then what Marcus changed the water in the bucket. The smell of bleach rose up between them. "Then, I don't know." "I do," Clark said. "Then you'll have fixed something that matters. You'll have proof that you're not invisible. And every company in this city will want to hire you. You don't know that. I know it the way you know when a system's architecture is broken. It's obvious once you understand what you're looking at." Marcus wrung out the mop. "What's your angle? Why would the company trust their system to a janitor?" Clark took a moment. He was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they're choosing whether to tell you the truth or the kind version of it. He chose the truth. 17 years ago, I was the guy they decided didn't fit. I was good at my job, but the company decided they needed a different kind of good. I ended up at a smaller company nobody had heard of. I spent 4 years building things that nobody used. I was angry. I was defeated. I'd convinced myself that the version of me that mattered was gone. He paused. Then I fixed one thing, one system that had been failing, and suddenly everyone cared. The difference between being invisible and being visible sometimes comes down to one person deciding you're worth noticing. I want to be that person for you, not because I'm being nice, but because I remember what it felt like to need someone to believe in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Marcus set down the mop. What's the actual offer? Come work as a consultant. We'll bring you in for the Helios project. You work on the architecture while you job search. You get your career back on track. We save the company. It's win-win. And if I can't fix it, then we're no worse off than we are now, and you will have shown up for something that mattered. Marcus thought about Sophie. He thought about telling her he's not going to be mopping anymore. He thought about the risk of that conversation. The way she'd gotten used to the predictability of his schedule. What it would feel like to be visible again. What it would feel like to fail at that visibility the way he'd failed before. I need to talk to my daughter first, he said. Of course. And I need to know that if this doesn't work, if I fail at this, I'll still have work. That I'm not going to end up visible and then discarded again. Clark met his eyes. I promise you, you won't. There was a sincerity in his voice that Marcus believed. He wasn't sure why, but he believed it. When do I start Monday? Your title is Senior Systems Architect. That's what I was before. I know. You're not going back to who you were. You're becoming who you were supposed to be. Marcus picked up the mop again. I'll need to tell my supervisor I'm leaving. I'll handle it. That night, Marcus sat Sophie down at the kitchen table and told her that everything was changing. That he wasn't going to be working nights anymore. That he was going to be working days in an office, doing the work he used to do before life had rearranged itself. He told her that he didn't know how long it would last. He told her that there was a chance it wouldn't work out. He told her that he was scared. Sophie listened. She was good at listening. She'd learned to listen the way children learn things, when they have to. When their survival depends on understanding grown-ups, they become very good at understanding. Are you scared you'll fail? She asked. Yes. Are you scared they won't want you anymore? Yes. Is that why you didn't tell anyone you could fix things? He looked at his daughter. How did you know that? Because you do that. You fix things at home, and you don't tell anyone. You fixed Mr. Chen's lock, and you didn't say anything. You fixed the thing at work, and you went home and mopped like nothing happened. You're good at fixing things, but you're scared to be the person who fixes things. She was 7, and she had seen straight through to the thing he couldn't articulate. Children did that. They looked at grown-ups and saw the thing that mattered. You're right, he said. You have to stop being scared, Sophie said, because if you're scared, then I'll be scared, and I don't want to be scared anymore. He reached across the table and took her hand. Okay, I'll stop being scared. You don't have to stop being scared, she said, correcting herself in the way that children correct themselves when they realize they've been imprecise. You just have to do it anyway. Even when you're scared. Even when I'm scared, he repeated. Like how I do the monkey bars, even though I'm scared of falling. Like that. But you never fall. Sometimes people do fall. And then what? Then you get back up. You try again. Sophie considered this. That's what you're going to do. That's what I'm going to do. She nodded. It was decided. The universe had shifted back into order. The following Monday, Marcus walked into the office not as custodial staff, but as senior systems architect. It was a different door, a different elevator, a different kind of seeing and being seen. His new office was on the 52nd floor down the corridor from Lab 7C. He could see the monitoring board from his desk if he leaned back far enough. The first week was difficult. The engineering team had spent 30 hours trying to solve a problem that Marcus had solved in 30 seconds. There was resentment in that. There was also awe. The combination created a strange energy. Some people respected him. Some people resented him. Some people wanted to know how he'd figured it out. He told them the truth. He'd been standing outside the problem. Sometimes that was the only way to see it. Clark brought him in to work alongside the team, not as an outsider making decisions, but as someone who could see things. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks reading through every line of Helios code. He found 14 architectural problems that had been overlooked. They weren't all related to the initial failure, but they were all connected. They were all part of the same broken pattern that the system was caught in. He wrote a proposal for how to fix them. It was detailed and technical, and it was also a thesis about what happened when systems got confused about their own purpose, when they had too many contradictory instructions, when they were trying to be everything instead of being something well. The proposal was 40 pages long. He submitted it on a Thursday afternoon. Clark called him into his office on Friday morning. "This is good," Clark said. "This is really good. But it's going to take time. And it's going to require the company to invest in the fix, not just patch the problem." "Are you sure about this?" "No," Marcus said. "But it's the right answer. The patch you've got now is temporary. In 3 months, the system will start failing again. The problems are foundational. They have to be addressed that way. That means building a new version." "Yes." Clark looked at the proposal. "How long?" 3 months. Maybe 4. Maybe a little longer. You're committing to 4 months of your life to fix this system. I'm committing to doing the work right. I've failed before by doing it fast. I'm not doing that again." Clark nodded. "Okay. We move forward. I'm telling the board on Monday. You'll have full resources. Whatever you need." Over the next 12 weeks, Marcus worked in a way he hadn't worked in 6 years. Not frantically, not trying to prove something, but with the steady focus of someone who understood that work was a form of prayer. It was how you said, "I am capable, and I am here, and I am not going to rush this." He brought his daughter to the office on Saturdays sometimes. She would sit at her father's desk with her own notebook and draw while he worked. Sometimes she'd ask him what he was doing. He'd explain it in the simplest terms. She'd nod like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe understanding wasn't about technical knowledge. Maybe it was about seeing your parent be fully themselves and knowing that that mattered. In his pocket, he kept a photograph. It was old. It was from before his wife had left, before his company had restructured, before his life had gone sideways. It was a photograph of his daughter at 3 years old, gap-toothed and laughing at something. Every morning before he came to the office, he looked at it, not for luck, but for remembering, for understanding that the thing he was building here, the thing he was fixing, was for her. It always had been. The system was ready for testing in early April. They brought in clients. They brought in investors. They brought in people whose companies depended on power grids working, people whose lives depended on it. The testing room was serious, in the way that only rooms full of people with real stakes could be serious. The Helios system came online. For the first 18 minutes, it performed exactly as designed. Load fluctuations handled smoothly. Demand prediction curves tracking within expected margins. The kind of solid, unremarkable operation that was correct behavior, but that didn't make observers lean forward. Then they introduced the fault injection, a simulated substation failure, a demand spike representing a cold weather peak load event, the kind of real scenario that had caused genuine problems in the past 5 years. This was the test. Not the most extreme scenario the system could face, but well within the range of real events. Marcus watched the process tree on the dual monitor setup. For 400 milliseconds, the system hesitated. The priority arbitration stack ran its assessment cycle. Demand prediction updated against the new load picture. The routing engine queried the available pathways. Then it moved. Not quickly in any visible dramatic sense, But in the logs, Marcus could see the decision chain. The system had identified 11 viable rerouting pathways, ranked them by efficiency and redundancy, selected the optimal combination, and begun implementing before the fault propagation had even reached the downstream substations. The impact curve, the measure of service degradation across the simulated population, peaked at 2.3% for 48 seconds, then fell smoothly back to baseline. In the old version of Helios, this scenario had triggered the feedback loop 7 times. In 4 of those 7 runs, the system had been unable to recover without manual intervention. This time, there was no loop. There was no hesitation after the initial assessment. There was the clean, uninterrupted execution of a system doing what it had been designed to do. The room was very quiet. Then someone in the second row began to clap. A single pair of hands. Not performative. More like punctuation. And then another pair joined. And then another. And the room found its way to a sustained, genuine applause that had the quality of acknowledgement rather than celebration. Clark caught Marcus's eye from across the room. He gave a single minimal nod, the kind of nod that meant something without requiring expansion. But none of this. None of the applause or the validation or the contracts that followed in the weeks after was the part that stayed with Marcus. Not the applause, not the validation. What stayed with him happened 3 weeks later. 3 weeks after the successful demonstration, Marcus took Sophie to the office on a Saturday. She asked to see where her father works. He didn't take her to his desk, which was ordinary. He took her to Lab 7C, to the corridor where he made his choice, to the monitoring board where the red became green. She was small for her age, brown-haired, and seriously faced, with her mother's way of looking at things for longer than most people would before deciding what she thought about them. She looked at the monitoring board for a long time without saying anything. "It's all green," she said. "It is now," he said. "Was it not before?" It was red for a while, for a very long time. She thought about this carefully. "And you fixed it. I helped it fix itself. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" He thought about how to answer. In a distributed model, the difference between fixing something and helping it fix itself was the difference between imposed solution and emergent recovery. But that wasn't what she was asking. The difference is that I didn't do the work alone. I just helped the system see what it already was. Once it saw that it could fix itself, she considered this. Like how I had to figure out that I was scared of the dark, and then I wasn't scared anymore. Exactly like that. But you helped me see. Yes. By sitting with me. By sitting with you. She looked back at the green board. "Dad, I told Mrs. Albright at school that my dad fixes things that other people can't fix." "What did she say to that?" "She said that was a very specific thing to say." "It is specific." I told her I meant it. I said, "I know, because I've watched you. I've watched you look at things carefully and then fix them. With the radiator, with Mr. Chen's lock, and this." She pointed at the board. He felt something settle in his chest. Not pride exactly. Something closer to recognition. His daughter saw him. Not the version of him that was defeated or invisible. She saw the version that fixes broken things. "Is it true," Sophie asked, "that you fix things other people can't?" He looked at the green board. The Helios system running clean, managing load flows, rerouting around faults before they cascaded, doing exactly what it was built to do. He thought about what had changed. Not the system, not the board, but him. His willingness to be visible again. His willingness to risk again. His willingness to be the person his daughter believed he was. I'm getting truer at it, he said. Every day a little bit truer. They stood in the corridor for a moment more. Father and daughter. The green board glowing behind them. Something in Marcus settled into the shape it was supposed to hold. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter than either of those. It was the feeling of standing straight after bending your shape to fit a space that never was yours, and discovering that the space you were built for still existed. It was still waiting. And more than that, it was his daughter, understanding that her father, the man who'd made mistakes, the man who'd fallen, the man who'd learned to disappear so completely that she'd forgotten he had a voice, was the kind of person who fixed broken things. Not because he wanted credit, not because he expected validation, but because there was something in him that couldn't walk past something broken without trying to fix it. That was who he was, not what he did. Who he was. And she knew it now. The Helios contract was signed in April. It covered 17 regional utilities across 9 states. The initial deployment was scheduled for Q3 of the same year. Marcus Hayes was named lead architect on the project. 3 months into the work, his title changed again. Director of Infrastructure, with a salary that meant Sophie would get her shoes. And next year, maybe a new winter coat. And maybe if things kept going, the things that families who lived normal lives got to plan for. College, travel. The future imagined more than 3 months out. But the thing that mattered most happened on a Tuesday morning in May. Marcus came home from the office to his small apartment and found Sophie sitting at the kitchen table with her school artwork. She'd been waiting for him. She showed him a drawing she made in art class. 2 figures standing in front of a building with green lights in all the windows. She'd labeled it carefully. Dad and me. Building systems. He looked at it for a long time. He didn't say anything. He went to the refrigerator and placed it among all the other drawings she'd made, the ones he'd been collecting, preserving, the evidence of her life, the evidence of who she is and who her father is to her. And Sophie, watching him, understood something about love, that it's not about being perfect or having your life arranged in the right order, that it's about standing up after you fall, that it's about being seen by someone who loves you and letting them see you truly. That it's about being the kind of person your daughter believes in, not because you're special, but because you show up. You keep trying. You fix broken things because that's who you are. Marcus understood finally that fixing the Helios system, fixing the technical problem that mattered to a company and a city and an industry, wasn't really what he was doing. He was fixing himself. He was becoming the man his daughter believed in. He was becoming, moment by moment, the person he was supposed to be all along. And the thing about systems, the thing he'd always known and never had to articulate, is that they don't forget what they were built to do. They just need the feedback loop to stop. They just need someone to help them see what they already are. Then they can be themselves. The city doesn't know the difference between the kinds of men who rise and fall, and rise again, and the kinds of men who were never broken. But in a small apartment in Chicago, one 7-year-old girl understands. She understands that her father is the kind of man who broke and fixed and became. She understands that he's the kind of person she wants to be. She understands that he's the kind of person who fixes broken things because that's who he is, not because anyone was watching. And that's a system that works.